Consider the term open-minded. Perhaps words pop into your mind such as equality, fairness, and justice. Or perhaps other words pop into mind, such as wishy-washy or hypocrite. Why such different terms when we consider the term open-minded? Well, most likely they stem from your socialization in the U.S. American political culture. As we learned in Chapter 2, Speaking Across Difference, open-minded means the willingness for a speaker to listen to views, perspectives, or beliefs different than their own and consider them fully before accepting or rejecting them. As a society, we are not particularly good at seeing, let alone considering, the many points of view that exist in our community regarding big issues. Increasingly, polarized politics continue to push just one perspective. Think about it. How often do you expose yourself to another perspective on a hotly contested issue for the sole reason of just better understanding their perspective, not to find data to prove them wrong? How often do you practice this type of open-mindedness? Your upcoming speech encourages just that, talking through difficult problems together. This is public deliberation. In this video, I'll share more information about what public deliberation is, why it's so important, and then we'll turn towards your speech and offer some considerations. So as defined by the Center for Public Deliberation here at CSU, public deliberation is a form of communication that features open spaces for people to gather, good and fair information that help structure the conversation, and skilled facilitators to help guide the process. Often, our engagement around contentious public issues happens in debate, where there's a clear winner and loser. Often in debate, open-mindedness gets thrown out the window. While debating, we are attempting to formulate our rebuttal while the other person is talking. Debate and persuasion are not the goals of public deliberation. Instead, the goal is to see both the issue and the audience member as much more complex. Next, let's consider why we even need to deliberate together. We have some big problems facing our world today, such as immigration and climate change. We refer to these as contentious issues often because it means that many folks have many different perspectives on how to solve these problems. If these were easy solutions to find that made everybody happy, we would have found them already. Dr. Martine Carcassonne, a leading expert on public deliberation, refers to these contentious issues as wicked problems. These are problems that have no easily found solutions, primarily because they involve competing underlying values. Think about any major public issue that's hotly contested. Our diverse values make it hard to come to a solution that pleases everyone. Some folks are firm on their stance that the solution should be centered around human safety, while others are firmly rooted in their belief that the solution should be involving economic benefit or environmental values. Consider the issue of mandating mask wearing to prevent the spread of a virus. Deliberation asks us to slow down long enough to understand the values of those rallying behind safety concerns. And it asks us to slow down long enough to understand the perspectives of those who value their freedom to choose what they wear on their bodies and when. Now, this doesn't mean that we leave agreeing, but we must be open-minded to consider many sides. Deliberation asks us to broaden our scope of complex issues to hold multiple competing values. Now, all of this complexity can be overwhelming and often results in many of us wanting to disengage in these conversations altogether. But to make the best overall decisions for our society, we need to examine competing values and make tough choices that often involve innovative solutions. The world needs more of this practice, and we, as your speech teachers, believe it's important to educate students with these civic competencies. Regardless of discipline or career path, governments, employers, and communities need citizens who can initiate, facilitate, and skillfully guide difficult yet transformative conversations across these contentious issues. To offer an example, some of the work that I do here at Colorado State and in the broader community is very deliberative in nature. I specialize in multi-faith and belief engagement. This means I work to facilitate spaces, whether there be classrooms or town halls, where people with diverse belief identities gather to discuss how they can work together to achieve common good for our society. We work to make sure we have diversity of voices in the room. Across a variety of religions and belief systems, including those who identify as non-religious, atheist, humanist, and many others. In this way, we allow folks to show up with their authentic selves to the space, not as a representative of their group. We do our best to gather good and fair information coming from science and legislation and even sacred text. We encourage folks to formulate questions that actively attempt to bypass oversimplifications of the issues and of people. And we ensure that everyone is given the respect and dignity that they deserve regardless of identity. Now, as you might guess, these are not easy conversations to set up or facilitate, but they are worth it. These deliberations have led to many wins in our community. We leave the deliberation with a greater understanding of how our diverse values influence decisions we make, like how to vote, educate our children, and how we buy goods. They've also led to wins like creating new nonprofits that house homeless people in local mosques, synagogues, and churches on a rotating basis. And they've also led to supportive legislation curbing carbon emissions in our community over the next 20 years. So now that we have a better understanding of what public deliberation is and why it's so needed, let's turn our focus towards your upcoming speech. Considering the timeline of all the speeches that you'll do in this class, the public deliberation speech comes after the informative speech and before the policy speech, because it's a combination of the two in many ways. You're going to research and bring in good and fair information, and also be considering several potential solutions for big, complex social issues. As the speaker, you will be delivering a speech and facilitating a dialogue with your audience, encouraging them to share a diversity of their perspectives on your chosen wicked problem. You, as the speaker, will remain neutral for the entire speech and dialogue. This speech is not about how you feel about the issue, but how our community feels more broadly. In this way, make sure that you're choosing a topic that you can perform neutrally on to the best of your ability. I ask my students to think about presenting their speech in a variety of ways, verbally, non-verbally, through the research you present, potential visual aids, and think, is there a way that my bias might leak through in those areas? For example, You'll want to be sure that you're providing the same type of open and inviting nonverbal posture, gestures, and facial expressions to a member of your audience who happens to be verbalizing a perspective that you agree with. And can you offer those same open and inviting nonverbals to someone who is voicing an opinion that you happen to disagree with? And consider the research that you present in your speech. Make sure you're choosing the best possible facts and studies to represent various perspectives. Think, how would someone of this perspective wish to be represented? And speak through their own quotes. And make sure that you're utilizing language that respects the diversity of perspectives. Use words such as advocates, or use a title that someone who values that perspective would appreciate being called. Make sure to consult Chapter 9's section called Speaking for Inclusion and Affirmation, so you can be sure to include community-preferred terminology. Toward this end, you'll want to think about crafting open-ended discussion questions to prompt your audience. You'll also want to think about how you will actively ask your audience to voice competing viewpoints. Although it's much more comfortable when we all agree on something, the focus of this speech is to practice the art of respectful, civil disagreement. As U.S. Americans, we can all use more practice giving someone with whom we completely disagree with our full attention and offering the dignity and respect that they deserve. Also, it's important to remember that you too will have your turn as an audience member, and then it's your job to respectfully and concisely offer your perspective on your peer's issue. Be mindful of how much space you take up, and remember to utilize deliberative language as well. Public deliberation asks us to be actively open-minded, willing to listen to views, perspectives, and beliefs that are different than our own, and fully consider them before accepting or dismissing them. I hope you now have a better understanding of what public deliberation is and why it's so needed in our world today. You also have some choices to consider as you move forward toward your speech. And after you've completed this speech, if you'd like to dig deeper into public deliberation, check out CSU's Center for Public Deliberation that's housed in the Communication Studies Department, where you can receive 4-credit facilitation deliberation training and even get to work with local organizations to assist them in discussing wicked problems they face when making public decisions.